What if the easiest way to declutter your entire house had nothing to do with motivation, memory, or willpower, and everything to do with your thermostat? Here's the part no one tells you. Most seniors don't stop decluttering because it's physically hard. They stop because it's mentally overwhelming. Sorting through categories, making endless decisions, handling objects tied to decades of memories, it's exhausting. And often, it leads to even more clutter shifting from one room to another. But one senior discovered something radically different. Instead of focusing on items, he focused on airflow. Specifically, where the air in his home felt naturally warm, comfortable, and inviting, the places his body moved toward without effort. Not emotionally charged closets or buried boxes in the garage, just the actual zones of comfort he lived in every day. From there, something clicked. The parts of his house that felt cold, untouched, and stale? That's where the forgotten clutter lived. And without sorting by category or sentiment, he cleared out 90% of it with almost no emotional fatigue. This isn't minimalism. It's smart aging. Like this video if you're tired of dragging the same objects across the house for years. And subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors for easier, smarter ways to age well, right where you are. Corman, 71, lived in the same single-story ranch house on the edge of Tucson for nearly 4 decades. The adobe walls had weathered dust storms, monsoons, and memories. He had worked most of his life as an HVAC technician, someone who understood airflow, heat pockets, and pressure zones better than anyone on the block. But after retiring, it wasn't technical knowledge that came in handy, it was something much more personal. He noticed his body moving differently through the house. Slowly, repetitively, almost like it was tracing invisible patterns. No matter what time of day, Corman ended up in one of 3 exact spots. The deep left corner of the living room, where the sun filtered in during morning hours. The right edge of his kitchen island, where the tile was warmest and the kettle sat within reach. And the bathroom sink, where the overhead light was soft, and the water ran just hot enough to soothe his stiff hands. That was it. Day after day, he realized he was spending almost 90% of his waking hours in these 3 pockets of space. Not even full rooms, just corners, edges, zones where his body instinctively settled. He wasn't avoiding the rest of the house intentionally, but entire rooms had fallen out of rotation. The guest bedroom? Freezing. The office? Dark, drafty, and hard to navigate. The garage? Cluttered and full of old tools he hadn't touched in years. This pattern nagged at him. As someone who used to study airflows professionally, Corman understood that warm zones were a result of insulation, sun positioning, and household layout. But now, they were something more. They were a reflection of how he actually lived. And so, instead of asking himself the usual decluttering questions, do I still like this? Or should I keep it just in case? He tried something completely different. He paused in the warmest spot of his home and asked, where does my body naturally go when I'm tired, cold, or need to feel at ease? Not his thoughts. Not his memories. Not his habits. Just his body. That one question changed everything. He realized he didn't need to declutter room by room, or item by item. He only needed to focus on the spaces that no longer drew him in, the places his body actively avoided. Because if his body didn't go there anymore, why was he still letting those areas shape his daily life? This wasn't about cleaning up. It was about reclaiming the areas where living actually happened. And that was the first move toward real clarity. As we move beyond 60, our relationship with the spaces around us changes, often without us realizing it. It's not just about needing less space or having more stuff. It's about comfort, energy, and how our bodies respond to the physical environment. Seniors tend to notice shifts in temperature more acutely. A light draft that once went ignored now feels like a chill down the spine. A dark room that once seemed cozy now feels like a strain on tired eyes. And a bright corner with steady warmth can suddenly feel like the safest, most welcoming part of the house. Corman understood this better than most, not just because of his HVAC background, but because his own habits had slowly revealed something powerful. He began to see his home not as a set of rooms, but as a series of thermal zones. Each area influenced his movement, his comfort, and, most surprisingly, his interaction with clutter. So he created a personal rule. Not based on emotions. Not based on sorting categories. But based entirely on use and warmth. He called it the Thermal-Zone rule, and it broke his home into 3 simple categories. Hot zones, the places his body was naturally drawn to every day. These were his daily use zones, spaces that stayed warm, well-lit, and easy to move through. Mild zones, areas he used occasionally, maybe once or twice a week. These had decent comfort but didn't serve a strong purpose. Cold zones, these were the spots he hadn't entered in weeks or months. They were dim, drafty, often cluttered, and quietly ignored. Once he labeled the zones, the clutter patterns became impossible to ignore. The back bedroom was the first cold zone he confronted. The air was stale. The window faced a shaded side of the house, keeping it permanently dim. A folding chair stood in the corner, buried under 3 layers of old jackets. Boxes of bedding and seasonal decor lined the walls, stacked high and untouched. He hadn't been in there in over 3 months. Not because he was avoiding memories, but because it simply didn't feel good to be there. Then there was the hallway shelf, packed with old electronics, tangled chargers, and unopened mail. A classic mild zone. He passed it every day, but never touched it. The clutter there wasn't sentimental or valuable, it was just invisible. Forgotten through repetition. In contrast, the breakfast table near the eastern window was in a bright, open area. The sunlight poured in between 8 and 10 a.m., warming the surface naturally. That space was always tidy. He cleared it daily, placed his coffee there, read the paper, and sat peacefully without being prompted. It required no effort to maintain, because he was already using it. That's when the realization clicked: comfort determines maintenance. The warmer and more used a space is, the more naturally it stays clean. The colder and more neglected it is, the more it collects what's no longer needed. By mapping thermal zones, Corman wasn't just tracking temperature. He was uncovering a live blueprint of his behavior, and the exact places where clutter was quietly building a home. And it was in those cold zones, not the crowded ones, where the real opportunity for change lived. Corman didn't start decluttering with a trash bag or a checklist. He started with a pencil, a blank sheet of paper, and an observation that most people miss: the body moves where it feels safe, warm, and welcomed. So instead of sorting by item or room, he decided to sort by temperature and usage. He sketched the layout of his house and labeled each room, hallway, and corner based on how often he naturally used it, and how physically comfortable it felt when he did. That's how his thermal declutter map was born. He broke it into 3 clear zones. Zone A, daily warm zones. These were the areas Corman used constantly, places where comfort and movement overlapped. His favorite living room chair, the sunny side of the kitchen island, and the bathroom sink all made the list. These zones were naturally maintained because he was in and out of them multiple times a day. They didn't collect clutter because his body never let them. Zone B, passive mild zones. These spaces were used every now and then, perhaps a couple of times a week. They weren't uncomfortable, but they weren't essential. The side hallway with an old bookshelf, the chair in the corner of the bedroom where he tossed laundry but never Saturday. These areas had mild energy. They didn't demand cleaning, but they also didn't overflow with mess. Zone C, cold dead zones. This was where things got interesting. These zones were ice cold, not just in temperature, but in activity. He hadn't walked into the spare guest room in over 2 months. The dining room cabinet hadn't been opened since Thanksgiving 2 years ago. The utility shelf near the garage door? Still holding a broken lamp he swore he'd fix but never would. And this is where Corman made his smartest move. He only decluttered in Zone C. No guilt. No debating. No pressure to organize or decide how he felt about something. If it lived in a dead zone and hadn't been touched in months, it got reviewed. And if it had no clear reason to return to a warm or mild zone, it went straight to the donation bin. But there was another secret to his success. He only decluttered when the sun was at its highest. That meant late morning to early afternoon, when the light made even the cold zones feel more bearable. This helped avoid the common problem many older adults face: cold fatigue. Trying to sort items in dim, drafty rooms often leads to early burnout and decision paralysis. By timing his effort with the sunlight, Corman made the process physically easier and mentally lighter. In just 1 week, the results were dramatic. He cleared 3 closets, 2 cabinets, a storage trunk, and a hallway table, without ever feeling emotionally drained or overwhelmed. He didn't get rid of anything based on memory or guilt. He followed movement, temperature, and use. If it wasn't in motion, it wasn't essential. This was more than a decluttering strategy. It was a system rooted in how the body lives, not how the mind argues. And once the cold zones were clear, his whole house started breathing again. Corman wasn't trying to become a minimalist. He wasn't chasing a Pinterest-perfect house or trying to impress anyone. He simply wanted to move through his home without feeling weighed down by junk, by decisions, or by the nagging sense that unused space was starting to take over his daily life. And by using the Thermal-Zone method, something remarkable happened in just 10 days. He started with the coldest places first, because that's where the clutter had gone to hide. The guest room closets were the first to go. They were filled with stale linens, extra bedding sets from the 1980s, blankets with broken zippers, pillowcases for beds that no longer existed. These closets sat behind doors that hadn't been opened in months. The air inside was still and musty. There was no emotional tug, just forgotten bulk. It wasn't a decision. It was a clearance. Next came the north side of the garage. This zone had remained untouched for over a year. That side never got direct sunlight, and it always stayed just a little cooler than the rest. Tucked inside were hobby kits he never started, boxes labeled maybe someday, and old electronics he'd meant to repair. Nothing in that section of the garage had been used or even remembered. It was all stored potential that never arrived. Then, there was the dining room's back corner, a space that collected unused decor like a forgotten attic. Dusty glass vases, a bowl of old keys, candles that had melted and reformed in odd shapes during a summer power outage. Corman couldn't remember the last time he'd turned on the lamp in that corner. When he finally cleared it, the room felt 5 feet wider. Lighter. Quieter. So what made this process work when so many others had failed? It was logic, not emotion. He wasn't asking whether he liked something, whether he might use it again, or whether it had meaning. He simply followed a physical truth. Seniors naturally cluster around warmth, light, and comfort. The body is drawn to these things automatically. So, if something had been sitting untouched in a dark, cold corner of the house for months, or even years, it was already out of his life. He just hadn't admitted it. That clarity gave him power. It bypassed the mental traps so many older adults face, the "what if I need this" loop, the guilt over gifts received, the fear of regret. Those cold zone items had already been removed from his routine. All he had to do was follow the temperature and trust the pattern. As Corman put it best, "I didn't have to think about what I liked. I just followed the heat." And that logic, simple, physical, undeniable, gave him something no checklist ever could: momentum. Because when you stop questioning every item and start listening to how you already live, decluttering becomes less of a battle and more of a release. After just a few weeks of clearing the coldest zones in his house, Corman didn't just notice less clutter, he noticed more movement. That was the first unexpected win. He no longer had to pivot sideways to squeeze past stacked bins in the hallway. The narrow kitchen pass-through was now open, letting him walk naturally instead of hugging the counter. Without even realizing it, his daily step count increased, not because he was trying to be more active, but because his house had stopped resisting him. What used to be a maze of slow navigation had become a place of quiet flow. Then came the second surprise: cleaning became 70% faster. Once the unnecessary objects were gone, dust no longer gathered in hard-to-reach corners, under stacks of boxes, or behind furniture he never used. The mop could glide freely. The vacuum didn't need awkward maneuvering. There were no more dump zones, those surfaces where papers, cords, and unopened mail piled up just because the space had no better purpose. Now, everything had air around it. And that meant less dust, less stress, and more breathing room, literally. But the most shocking result wasn't visible. It was on the utility bill. His energy costs dropped. Without all that excess stuff blocking vents, crowding corners, or absorbing and holding onto ambient heat, the airflow improved dramatically. The house no longer had to overwork to maintain temperature. Corman even noticed that the room stayed warmer longer in winter and cooler longer in summer. It was like the house had finally exhaled. Still, none of those benefits compared to what he called the real gift: no more hesitation. He never once stood frozen in front of a drawer asking, "Should I keep this?" No emotional tug-of-war. No spiraling into nostalgia or second-guessing. His decluttering decisions weren't made through hours of mental debate. They were made in advance, by his body. If he hadn't moved toward it, it wasn't needed. If he hadn't touched it in months, it was already gone. This physical-first approach freed him from the emotional weight that most people dread about decluttering. It made every decision simple. And that simplicity didn't just lighten his house, it lightened his mind. For Corman, the result wasn't just a cleaner space. It was a sense of quiet power. Because when your home matches how you live, how you actually move, how you naturally rest, where your energy flows, every step becomes easier. And not once did he regret what he let go of. Not because he was detached, but because he had finally aligned his environment with his real, everyday life. And when your home stops arguing with your body, even the smallest movements start to feel like freedom. If you're ready to try Corman's method, you won't need storage bins, labels, or even much time. All you need is 15 quiet minutes, your feet, and your natural sense of comfort. The thermal zone trick doesn't ask you to sort by category or dig into drawers. Instead, it asks a very simple question: where does your body feel most at ease, and where does it avoid? To begin, take off your shoes and walk your home slowly at 3 different times of the day. 10 a.m., when natural light is rising. 2 p.m., when rooms have had time to warm or cool. After dinner, when your body naturally seeks comfort and rest. Why barefoot? Because your feet are one of the most sensitive ways to detect warmth, cold, drafts, and softness. You'll instantly notice where the floor feels inviting, and where it feels like you're walking into a forgotten basement. This isn't about analysis. It's about awareness. Next, keep a simple piece of paper with 2 columns, warmest spots and coldest spots. Each time you do your walkthrough, pause and write down where your body stops naturally. Don't overthink it. Just observe. If your feet hesitate, if your shoulders tense, or if you step around something, mark that space down. Once you've identified the 3 coldest zones, it's time for the most important part. Start decluttering only in one of those cold zones. No exceptions. No jumping ahead. No, maybe I'll just straighten the kitchen while I'm at it. Stay laser-focused on the coldest space first. That's where the most forgotten clutter is hiding, quietly taking up space without purpose. Now ask this question about anything you touch in that area. Has this object moved or been used in the last 3 months? If the answer is no, and it lives in a cold zone, it's safe to release. Why? Because your body has already voted with its feet. If you haven't naturally gone to that space or item in over 90 days, it's not part of your real, lived life. Let it go, without guilt. Finally, keep an eye out for anything important that doesn't belong in that cold zone. You might find your reading glasses, your favorite jacket, or even medications that migrated to a drawer and were forgotten. When that happens, reroute them. Move them to your warm zones, your daily use, comfort-first areas. That one act will make your essentials easier to reach, and your clutter easier to see. You don't need to do this all in one day. Start with one corner. Let your comfort guide you. And here's a challenge. Which corner of your house always feels cold, cluttered, or forgotten? Drop it in the comments, we might feature it in the next video. You'd be amazed how much space you can reclaim, not by sorting your things, but by listening to your steps. Corman didn't declutter by making peace with his past. He didn't sit on the floor surrounded by keepsakes, trying to force joy or recall memories. That approach, while helpful for some, never worked for him. It was too slow, too emotional, too draining. He wasn't looking for a sentimental experience. He was looking for relief. Something clear, direct, and rooted in how he actually lived day to day. What changed his life wasn't a checklist or a storage method. It was pattern recognition. He began to notice where his body naturally flowed, where the light pooled during certain hours, which corners held heat and comfort, and which ones always felt abandoned. That awareness became his compass. When he stopped treating his home like a collection of memories and started treating it like a living environment that should work with him, everything began to shift. Suddenly, decisions became obvious. Not emotional. Not complicated. Just functional. It wasn't about what mattered in the past. It was about what made sense now. His breakthrough wasn't sentimental, it was practical. He realized that the things he never touched, never moved toward, never missed, didn't need to be there. And because of that, he didn't second-guess. He didn't store. He didn't spend weekends wondering whether to keep a box of tangled cords or a cracked serving platter. He let the way he moved through his home tell him what to keep and what to release. The result? He saved time. He saved energy. And most importantly, he gained clarity. Now, he walks through his home without bumping into outdated furniture or forgotten piles. He can breathe. He can reach. He can rest. His home no longer drags him backward, it supports him forward. The beauty of the Thermal-Zone method is that it's not based on taste or opinion. It's based on something honest, how you live, how you move, what your body knows without even thinking. And that kind of clarity isn't just refreshing, it's freeing. So here's the final takeaway. Don't declutter by memory. Declutter by movement. And if this video opened your eyes to a completely new way of thinking about your space, go ahead and tap that like button. Share it with someone over 60 who's tired of trying the same advice over and over, and is finally ready to breathe easier. And for more smart, practical, and peaceful ways to age well, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors today.